Welcome to Unreported Crime Files, where we delve into the darkest corners of human nature to uncover the truth behind some of the most shocking crimes. Today, we're taking you to the quiet upper-middle-class suburb of Oak Grove, Illinois. But beneath the surface of this idyllic community, a sinister plot was brewing, a plot that would end in murder. This is the story of how a husband's twisted obsession led him to poison his wife, all so he could marry her daughter. Linda Thompson was a 48-year-old with big dreams and a loving family in Oak Grove. She was well known in the community for her friendly nature and warm smile. Linda was the kind of person who would always stop to chat with neighbors and was happy to lend a hand when needed. She was active in the local community, often volunteering at church events and organizing neighborhood barbecues. Linda's friendly nature made her well-liked by everyone she met. Linda lived in a charming two-story home on a tree-lined street in Oak Grove, a suburb of Chicago known for its beautiful architecture and strong sense of community. Oak Grove is often described as having a bohemian chic vibe, with its famously liberal politics, mix of old and new homes, local coffee shops, and vibrant art scene. Linda's home was filled with family photos, cozy furniture, and a kitchen that always smelled like freshly baked cookies. She loved cooking and was known for her famous chocolate chip cookies, which she often brought to work or shared with neighbors. Linda was married to Mark Thompson, a man 16 years her junior. Despite the age difference, Linda and Mark appeared to be a happy couple. Mark worked for a health insurance company and was often busy with work, but the couple made time for each other. They had been married for 5 years and lived with Linda's daughter from a previous marriage, 19-year-old Emily Davis. Emily was a bright and ambitious college student studying pre-med and had dreams of becoming a doctor. Linda was proud of her daughter and supported her in every way she could. In the weeks leading up to her death, Linda was planning a family vacation to Disney World. She was excited about the trip and talked about it constantly. She had recently purchased a new suitcase and was filling it with summer clothes, sunscreen, and a new pair of sandals. Linda loved spending time with her family and couldn't wait for the getaway. But Linda's excitement would forever be cut short when, on the morning of April 17, 2019, she was found dead in her home. On that cool, overcast spring morning, Oak Grove was just waking up. The neighborhood was quiet, with only a few early risers out walking their dogs or grabbing their morning coffee from Starbucks. Linda had always been an early bird, but that day, something was wrong. At around 8:30 a.m., Emily went downstairs to the kitchen. She found her mother lying on the floor, unresponsive. A can of Linda's favorite drink, Diet Coke, was spilled beside her, the sugary liquid slowly seeping into the grout between the tiles. Panicked, Emily screamed and immediately called 911, her hands shaking as she dialed. The dispatcher's voice tried to calm her down, but Emily was too overwhelmed. She was crying and begging for someone to come quickly. When the paramedics arrived just minutes later, they found Emily in shock, pacing back and forth in the living room. The house was eerily quiet, except for the sound of the 911 call still echoing from Emily's phone on the kitchen counter. The paramedics rushed to Linda's side, but it was too late. Linda was declared dead at the scene. Emily couldn't believe what was happening. Just the day before, her mother had been excitedly talking about their upcoming vacation, picking out outfits and making plans. Now she was gone, and Emily was left feeling lost and confused. As the paramedics worked, Emily called her stepfather, Mark, who was at work at the time. Mark's reaction was hysterical. He immediately started wailing, almost screaming as Emily sobbed into the phone. He told her he would leave work right away, but he sounded almost insane with grief. The Oak Grove Police Department was quick to respond to the scene at the Thompson residence. Detective Sarah Rodriguez, who had been with the department for over 15 years, led the investigation. Rodriguez was known for her sharp eye and methodical approach. She had a reputation for solving even the most challenging cases. When she arrived at the scene on the morning of April 17, 2019, she immediately sensed something was off. The Thompson home was a typical well-kept suburban house with a neat lawn and flower beds starting to bloom with the first signs of spring. Inside, the house was clean and organized. The only sign of anything out of the ordinary was the sight of Linda's lifeless body on the kitchen floor. Next to her was a spilled can of Diet Coke, its contents pooling around her. Detective Rodriguez and her team began their work by securing the crime scene. Yellow tape was quickly put up around the perimeter of the house, and officers were stationed at the entrance to keep onlookers and neighbors at a distance. The investigators carefully examined the kitchen. There were no signs of forced entry, and nothing appeared to be out of place. Linda's purse was on the counter, untouched, and the back door was locked from the inside. The team noticed that the can of Diet Coke was still relatively full, with only a small amount spilled on the floor. This caught Rodriguez's attention. She instructed the crime scene unit to collect the can as evidence, along with the remaining liquid. The team also took samples from the kitchen counter and floor to test for any unusual substances. They photographed the scene from every angle, documenting every detail. An autopsy was ordered to determine the exact cause of Linda's death. The paramedics on the scene had suspected a heart attack, but Rodriguez wasn't so sure. There was something about the way Linda was positioned and the fact that she had been drinking her favorite soda just moments before that made Rodriguez suspicious. As the investigation continued, the detectives combed through the house for more clues. They searched Linda's personal belongings, looking for anything that might suggest foul play. Her phone was also taken as evidence, with the intention of checking her recent calls and messages. Detective Rodriguez knew this case would require careful examination. There was more, much more, to Linda's death than met the eye. With Linda Thompson's death under investigation, the police turned their attention to the people closest to her. The first person they questioned was her husband, Mark Thompson. At 32 years old, Mark was much younger than Linda. He worked for a health insurance company in Chicago and had a reputation for being handsome, charming, and successful. He seemed to have everything: a stable job, a nice home, and a wonderful family. But as detectives began to dig deeper, they uncovered a different side of Mark. Mark had met Linda 6 years earlier when he was working as a junior analyst at the insurance company. Linda, a widow at the time, had been charmed by his youthful energy and confidence. They married a year later, and Mark became a stepfather to Linda's daughter, Emily, then 13. On the surface, their marriage seemed solid, but friends noticed that Mark had become more distant from Linda in the past year. He spent longer hours at work, often coming home late or claiming he had to travel for business. During his first interview with the police, Mark appeared calm, even cold. He expressed shock over Linda's death, but his emotions seemed muted. He told Detective Rodriguez that he had been at work when it happened and had rushed home as soon as Emily called. When asked about his relationship with Linda, Mark claimed that they had a good marriage, though he admitted they had grown apart over time. He insisted that he had nothing to do with her death and had no idea why anyone would want to harm her. However, as the interview continued, Detective Rodriguez's suspicions grew. Mark was too composed, too controlled. When asked about Linda's daily routine, Mark was vague, saying he was a feminist and didn't like to keep track of his wife's day-to-day activities. He also couldn't recall the last time they had a meaningful conversation or had been intimate as a couple. Rodriguez found it odd that Mark, who claimed to love his wife, seemed so disconnected from her life. The detectives also noticed inconsistencies in Mark's statements. For instance, he mentioned that he knew about Linda's favorite drink, Diet Coke, yet he couldn't explain why there was a half-empty can next to her body when she was found. He claimed Linda drank soda often, but didn't seem to know much about her other habits or routines. As the police continued to question Mark, they began to consider his potential motive. Could Mark have wanted out of the marriage? Or was there something else, something darker driving him? The investigation into Mark's life revealed that he had been keeping secrets. One of the most shocking was his sexual obsession with his stepdaughter, Emily. This revelation gave the police a new angle to pursue. If Mark was in love with Emily, it could explain why he might want Linda out of the way. But proving that Mark was involved in Linda's death would require much more evidence. Detective Rodriguez knew they had to be thorough, carefully piecing together the puzzle that was starting to form. The next person the police investigated was Emily Davis, Linda's 19-year-old daughter from a previous marriage. Emily was a bright and driven young woman who was well on her way to becoming a doctor. She was a pre-med student at Northwestern University in Chicago, where she had earned a scholarship for her academic excellence. Emily was known for her kindness and dedication to her studies, often volunteering at local hospitals and tutoring fellow students. Emily had always looked up to her mother, seeing Linda as a role model of strength and compassion. The two were incredibly close, often spending weekends together shopping, watching movies, or just talking about life. Linda had been Emily's biggest supporter, especially after the death of Emily's biological father when she was just a child. The loss had forged an incredibly strong bond between mother and daughter, making Linda's sudden death all the more devastating for Emily. When the police first approached Emily, she was visibly distraught. The grief of losing her mother was compounded by the shock of finding her dead body. Emily told the detectives that she had been studying for an upcoming biology exam when she decided to take a break and grab a snack. She went to the kitchen and found her mother on the floor, unresponsive, with a can of Diet Coke nearby. In a panic, Emily called 911, hoping against hope that it wasn't too late. During the interview, Emily was cooperative but deeply emotional. She described her mother's recent mood as happy and content, with no signs of stress or unhappiness. Emily couldn't think of anyone who would want to harm Linda, describing her mother as someone who was loved by everyone who knew her. The police asked Emily about her relationship with Mark, her stepfather, and Emily spoke highly of him, saying that he was like a real dad to her, and that she saw him as a supportive father figure. She was completely unaware of his secret sexual obsession with her, a fact that made the police even more concerned. As detectives delved deeper into Emily's life, they found nothing to suggest she had any involvement in her mother's death. Her alibi checked out. Emily had been in her room, engrossed in her studies at the time of the murder. Her social media activity showed a typical college student's life, with posts about school, friends, social justice causes, and upcoming exams. There were no signs of any secret relationships or troubling behavior. However, the police were still suspicious of the dynamics within the Thompson household. They wondered if Emily could have been an unknowing pawn in Mark's plan. If Mark's sexual obsession with Emily was as intense as they suspected, it could mean that Emily was in danger too. But for now, there was no evidence linking Emily to the crime, leaving detectives to focus their attention elsewhere. The third person the police questioned was Rachel Miller, Linda's closest friend and confidant. Rachel, 45, was a real estate agent who had known Linda for over a decade. The two women had bonded over their shared experiences as working women in Oak Grove and had become inseparable over the years. Rachel was often seen at Linda's home, helping with community events or just sharing a glass of wine in the evenings. To those who knew them, their friendship seemed unbreakable, a bond built on trust and mutual respect. However, the police soon discovered that Rachel had been keeping a significant secret. Despite her outward loyalty to Linda, Rachel had been having an affair with Mark Thompson. This revelation came as a shock to everyone who knew the trio, especially given Rachel's deep friendship with Linda. According to Rachel, the affair began about a year before Linda's death. She claimed that it started innocently, with Mark attending one of Rachel's infamous pool parties alone. A few flirtatious comments later, things quickly escalated into a full-blown sexual relationship. Rachel admitted to feeling a little guilty about betraying her friend, but said she couldn't resist Mark's charm. When the police interviewed Rachel, she was nervous and defensive. She knew that her affair with Mark placed her under suspicion, but she insisted that she had nothing to do with Linda's death. Rachel claimed that she was saddened by Linda's passing and had even considered ending her relationship with Mark because of the guilt she felt. However, she also revealed that Mark had recently told her he was in love with someone else, leaving her devastated. Rachel didn't know who the other woman was, but she suspected it might be someone younger. The detectives pressed Rachel for more details about her relationship with Mark and her whereabouts on the day of Linda's death. Rachel stated that she had been at a real estate showing in a nearby town and had clients who could verify her alibi. The police followed up on this, confirming that Rachel was indeed with clients at the time of the murder. However, they couldn't ignore the possibility that Rachel might have been involved in some way, given her emotional turmoil and jealousy over Mark's shifting affections. Despite her alibi, Rachel remained a person of interest in the investigation. Her affair with Mark, coupled with her close relationship with Linda, made her a complicated figure in the case. The police had to consider whether Rachel's jealousy and heartbreak might have driven her to do something drastic. But without concrete evidence linking her to the crime, Rachel was left in a precarious position, caught between her guilt over the affair and her sorrow over losing her friend. On April 27, 2019, just after 9 a.m., the weather in Oak Grove was cool and overcast, typical for an Illinois spring. As investigators continued to search for clues, they received a significant break in the case. A toxicology report came back from the lab, revealing that Linda Thompson's cause of death was cyanide poisoning. The lethal substance had been mixed into her can of Diet Coke, confirming that her death was not a natural occurrence, but a deliberate act of murder. The revelation of cyanide as the murder weapon shocked the investigation team. Cyanide is a rare and deadly poison, often associated with high-profile cases in espionage. The detectives knew they were dealing with a premeditated crime. Someone had gone to great lengths to plan and execute Linda's murder. This new evidence shifted the focus of the investigation, giving the police a clearer direction. The detectives immediately revisited the crime scene, searching for any trace of the poison or how it might have been introduced into Linda's drink. They examined the Diet Coke can, the surrounding area in the kitchen, and any containers or objects that might have come into contact with the poison. Forensic experts were called in to analyze everything from the remnants of the drink to the fingerprints on the can. While no direct trace of cyanide was found in the kitchen, the forensic team did find traces of the poison on the rim of the can, confirming that it had been deliberately laced with the deadly substance. The discovery raised more questions. Who had access to the poison, and how did they get it into Linda's drink without her noticing? The police began to dig into the backgrounds of all the suspects, searching for any history of chemical knowledge or access to dangerous substances. They also looked into recent purchases and online searches that might indicate someone had been researching or acquiring cyanide. The detectives knew that cyanide was not something easily obtained. Whoever had used it had likely done some serious planning. This new evidence also put pressure on the suspects. The police re-interviewed them, focusing on their knowledge of poisons and any suspicious behavior leading up to Linda's death. The detectives were determined to find out who had the means and motive to commit such a calculated crime. With the case now pointing definitively to murder, the investigation took on a new urgency as they closed in on the truth. On April 30th, 2019, just before noon, the police made a breakthrough in the investigation that would lead them directly to the murderer. After carefully examining the evidence and re-interviewing the suspects, the detectives had begun to piece together a disturbing picture. All signs pointed to Mark Thompson, Linda's husband, as the one responsible for her death. Mark Thompson, 32, was a charming and successful man who worked at a health insurance company. Outwardly, he appeared to have it all: a stable job, a beautiful wife, and a picture-perfect life in the progressive suburb of Oak Grove. However, beneath the surface, Mark was a man driven by dark and twisted desires. He had become sexually obsessed with Linda's daughter and his stepdaughter, Emily Davis. Mark had secretly harbored sexual feelings for Emily, who was only 19 and completely unaware of his intentions. As his obsession grew, Mark became increasingly distant from Linda, seeing her as an obstacle to his disturbing fantasy of starting a new life with Emily as his bride. Detectives uncovered key evidence that tied Mark to the crime. An analysis of his internet search history revealed that he had been researching cyanide for several months before Linda's death. He had searched for information on where to buy it, how to use it, and its effects on the human body. This damning evidence suggested that Mark had carefully planned the murder, intending to use cyanide to get rid of Linda without leaving a trace. On the day of the murder, Mark had taken advantage of Linda's daily routine. He knew that she loved Diet Coke and drank a can every day after work. According to the investigation, Mark had spiked her can of Diet Coke with cyanide, knowing that she would drink it as soon as she got home. The poison worked quickly, causing Linda to collapse and die within minutes. Mark's plan was to make it look like a sudden heart attack, but the toxicology report revealed the truth. The police confronted Mark with the evidence they had gathered. At first, he tried to maintain his innocence, but as the detectives laid out the facts, his internet searches, his growing obsession with Emily, and the traces of cyanide found on the can, Mark's facade began to crumble. Mark's arrest shocked the Oak Grove community. Linda's friends and neighbors were horrified to learn that the man they had once thought of as a devoted husband had committed such a heinous act. Emily was devastated by the revelation, struggling to come to terms with the fact that the man she had considered a father figure had been secretly plotting against her mother. The trial of Mark Thompson began on January 15, 2020, in Cook County Circuit Court. The case drew significant media attention, with local news channels covering the proceedings extensively. Linda Thompson's murder had shocked the Oak Grove community, and many people were eager to see justice served. The prosecutor, Assistant State's Attorney James Leary, 45, was known for his thorough and determined approach to criminal cases. Leary presented a strong case against Mark Thompson. He argued that Mark had planned Linda's murder with premeditation, pointing to the evidence of cyanide found in Linda's Diet Coke and Mark's extensive internet searches about the poison. Leary described Mark's actions as cold and calculated, emphasizing how Mark's obsession with Emily Davis drove him to commit the crime. On the other side, Mark's defense attorney, Laura Phillips, 38, tried to paint a different picture. Phillips argued that Mark was a man who had been overwhelmed by personal problems and stress, which might have affected his judgment. She claimed that Mark's actions were not premeditated, but a result of mental instability. Phillips tried to argue that there was not enough direct evidence linking Mark to the poisoning, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. During the trial, Linda's family, including Emily, attended each day, visibly emotional and distressed. Emily was particularly affected by the trial, having to confront the reality of her stepfather's betrayal and her mother's death. The court saw tearful testimonies from friends and colleagues of Linda, who described her as a loving and caring person who would never have imagined such a violent end. After several days of testimony and evidence presentation, the jury deliberated and returned a verdict on January 22, 2020. Mark Thompson was found guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced Mark to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. The sentence was met with a mix of relief and sorrow by Linda's family and friends. They felt that while justice had been served, the pain of losing Linda and the betrayal by Mark would linger. The verdict brought a sense of closure to the case, but it left a lasting impact on those involved. Linda's friends and family had to cope with the aftermath of the trial, trying to rebuild their lives while remembering the warmth and kindness Linda had brought into their lives. The trial was a stark reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind even the most seemingly perfect facades. After Mark Thompson's trial and sentencing, life in Oak Grove began to return to normal, but the impact of the case was still deeply felt by those involved. The Thompson family was forever changed, and the community was left grappling with the aftermath of the crime. Mark Thompson was transferred to the Illinois Department of Corrections, where he began serving his life sentence. His trial had been highly publicized, and he became a known figure in the prison system. His imprisonment was a stark contrast to the life of luxury he had once enjoyed. The media coverage of his case continued for some time, with many local news outlets reporting on his adjustment to prison life and his interactions with other inmates. Emily Davis, Linda's daughter, faced a challenging road ahead. She was a pre-med student at the time of her mother's death and had been deeply affected by the murder. After the trial, Emily took a leave from school to focus on her mental health and process the trauma of the past months. She received support from friends, family, and professional counselors. Her community rallied around her, and many people admired her resilience and strength during such a difficult time. Rachel Miller, Linda's former friend and Mark's secret lover, also had to navigate the consequences of the case. Although she was cleared of any involvement in the murder, the affair and the role she played in Mark's life made her a controversial figure. Rachel's real estate business suffered due to the negative publicity. She decided to move to a different city to start over, hoping to leave the past behind and rebuild her career and personal life. As time went on, Linda's friends and family worked to find a sense of normalcy. They focused on remembering her in positive ways and continuing the community work she had been passionate about. The case served as a harsh reminder of how quickly a life can be upended by betrayal and violence, leaving lasting scars on everyone involved. The Thompson case became a cautionary tale in Oak Grove and beyond. It sparked conversations about domestic violence, hidden abuse, and the importance of being aware of the warning signs in relationships. Local organizations used the case as a platform to raise awareness and provide resources for those who might be in similar situations. In the years following the trial, Emily Davis eventually returned to her studies, more determined than ever to become a doctor. She established a scholarship in her mother's name at Northwestern University, aimed at supporting students who had overcome personal tragedies. Emily's strength and resilience in the face of such devastating circumstances inspired many in her community. The Oak Grove Police Department, particularly Detective Sarah Rodriguez, received commendations for their thorough investigation of the case. The experience led to improved training protocols for dealing with complex domestic murder cases and the use of toxicology in investigations. As for Mark Thompson, he remained in prison, his appeals consistently denied. He became a subject of true crime documentaries and books, with many trying to understand the psychology behind his actions. His case was studied by criminologists and psychologists, seeking to gain insights into the minds of those who commit such heinous crimes against their own families. The Thompson case left an indelible mark on Oak Grove. It served as a stark reminder that even in the most idyllic communities, darkness can lurk behind closed doors. The tragic story of Linda Thompson, a beloved community member whose life was cut short by the person she should have been able to trust the most, continued to resonate with people long after the trial ended. It was a somber lesson in the importance of vigilance, compassion, and the complexities of human nature. In the end, the case of Linda Thompson's murder was more than just a sensational true crime story. It was a human tragedy that touched the lives of many, leaving behind a legacy of pain, resilience, and a community forever changed by the darkness that had briefly touched their lives.